My Family Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, part 2 of the color line. We're looking at 1916. Universal Negro Improvement Association, 1914. It was brought to the United States by Marcus Garvey from Jamaica. He would move into Harlem, New York, and he had a movement for freedom. That was his agenda. 1917, Ruth Foster would create the Negro National League of Baseball. It was in full swing. Baltimore Lords and the Louisville Falls Cities, Boston Resolutions, New York Garments, the Philadelphia Pythons, Washington Capital Cities, the Pittsburgh Pythons, Cincinnati Browns. Cincinnati Browns was a very underrated team. All those men fought in the Colored Negro League. Were outstanding baseball players. They were athletic. And they were the best of the best. 1918 would begin the Harlem Renaissance. Many black dignitaries, performers and artists, as well as musicians, would display their talents as they came from the South and they fell into Harlem, New York. Jelly Bean, Will Martin, Duke Ellington, Josephine Baker, Paul Robeson, Louis Armstrong, Langston Hughes, just a handful of talent that would be spread out through Harlem, New York. 1923, Supper Club was owned by Jack Johnson. Owning Maddies would take over the club. He was a prison inmate of Sing Sing. Did half the time he was scheduled to serve. He would wind up becoming a boxing manager. But Jack Johnson, by this time in his career, in his life, he had to walk on eggshells. And Owen Maddox knew that. So he strong-armed the establishment and he promised Jack Johnson that he would give him 20% because he kept going into the club with a fake badge and he would tell Jack Johnson he wanted 20%. And the first 2 times, Jack Johnson would give him 20%. Didn't need any further problems that he already had with the government. Then Jack Johnson said, wait a minute. What am I getting out of this? Owen Manning threatened him. Stated that I know where you are and they're looking for you. There's some unfinished time that you have to do in prison. Jack Johnson would wind up moving to Chicago and he would give up the establishment. But while that establishment was ran, he was supported by Joe Walcott, Theodore Tiger Flowers, Joe Jeanette, Harry Wills. And he had that club going. Alcohol, prostitution. He was making a killing. Owen Maddox got wind of that. He said, no. This is my new club. When Jack Johnson asked for his 20%, Owen Maddox said, are you out of your cotton picking mind? Which was the phrase used when slaves asked to go into the house of the plantation owners to get a drink of water. And The plantation owners would say to them, "Are you out of your cotton picking mind?" Ralph George Galloway, out of Kansas City, Missouri. Weighed 158 pounds. He stood 5'10.5". He faced Jim Coleman, November 23rd. James Barry out of Boston, Massachusetts. Lost to him in 10 rounds. He was also in the ring with Dan Porky Flynn. He was supposed to face Stanley Ketchel in Pittsburgh, but the fight got canceled when the AAU accused Ketchel of faking a bout with Frank Klaus. He would face Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost. Lost to him in 10 rounds. February 17th, 1911. He faced Sam Langford, Syracuse, New York. Lost to him in 4 rounds. June 26th, be in the ring with Battling Levinsky, Albany, New York. July, Cleveland Hawkins, Gary, Indiana. Lose to him in 1 round. 1913, May 3rd, to be exact. Jeff Clark, who was known as the Joplin Ghost, would lose in 3 rounds. Nerone Cheek, Puerto Rican fighter. Weighed 156 pounds, stood 5'10". February 11th, 1916. June 10th, 1929 were his boxing years. 45 recorded bouts. He'd be in the ring with Willie Langford, Silent Martin, Stanley Myers, and young Sam Langford. October 28th, 1921. Lost 12 rounds to Panama Joe Gans, New York's Madison Square Garden. Before the colored middleweight championship crown, May 22nd, 1922. Panama Joe Gans were losing 10 rounds in Cuba, Havana. Sylvester David, 5'10", weighed 150 pounds, fought from 1925 to 1931. These are forgotten names in the black community. Great fighters in their day. Raymond Dozier, his name was Battling Dozier. He stood 5'9", weighed 143 to 164 pounds. He was out of Omaha, Nebraska. He was managed by Charles Wiener. He fought out of California, Reno, Nevada to be exact. Washington State. Now the thing with Raymond Dozier, the weights he fought in was lightweight, welterweight, and middleweight, as well as light heavyweight and heavyweight. Be in the ring with Freddie Steele, Paulie Walker, young Jack Dempsey, Baby Baghdad, Eddie Muddard, Andy DeValley, all 10 top 10 opponents. They were 10 rounders at best. Now Raymond Dozier had asked young Corbett III for a title opportunity. He was denied. But he would face Freddie Steele, King Tut, Ralph Chong, Alfonso Gonzalez, Freddie Hope, Carlos King Solomon, Tiger Jack Payne, and Patty Ryan. Harry Marone Dudley, young Dudley, weighed 135 to 150 pounds. He stood 5'9". He faced Solomon Solly Seaman, Joe Dundee, Sergeant Sammy Baker, young Jack Thompson, Santiago Esparagosa, the Corporal. He's 6 foot, weighed 160 to 175 pounds. Fought from June 15, 1920 to February 28, 1931. The champion, light heavyweight and heavyweight of Cuba. June 16, 1923. Relax, Santiago, Havana, Cuba. He fought as a light heavyweight. June 16, 1923. And he would become a 2-time Cuban champion. Charles Larry Estridge, the Black Stanley Ketchel, was born June 17, 1902. St. Kitts, British West Indies. He died September 1987 in the Bronx, New York. He was a southpaw. Stood 5'9", weighed 150 to 162 pounds. He was managed by George P. Moore. I had the pleasure of meeting Larry Estridge. He was a replica of marvelous Marvin Hagler. Reminded me so much of him. The sports writer Paul Gallico once called Larry Estridge the long-handed fighter. Originally out of St. Croix, 1907, for me, Larry Estridge was the Marvin Hagler of the 1920s. Black southpaw, middleweight, and he was damn good. The champion who could punch with either hand. He was a member of the Harlem Hellfighters, 15th Regiment. Larry knocked out the toughest kid in the neighborhood because the kid tried to take over his newspaper route. Eddie Dorsey, a well-established and highly regarded lightweight, would try out Larry Estridge. Larry Estridge would give him the business. Part-time elevator operator, 1919, Larry Estridge would marry a young lady. She was a friend of his. Her name was Lillian. They would have a badly experience in the apartment that they were living in. They would create Charles Estridge Jr. St. Christopher Gym would be the gym that Larry Estridge would train in. May 1922. National Middleweight AAU Championships. He knocked out an outstanding fighter in his day, 158 pounds. He would win the state and metropolitan middleweight championship crown. There were great gyms in Harlem, New York at that time. It was the St. Bartholomew. It was a club close to 165th Street. St. Methodist Baptist Church. It was a gymnasium in the basement off 124th Street. St. Christopher's Gym, Harlem Athletic Club, Grubb's Gym was located on 116th Street. And in those gyms, you had some of the greatest black fighters that would walk in and out of those gyms. George Godfrey, the Leaperville Shadow. Danny Cox, who was a heavyweight. Jack McVeigh, the Pride of Harlem. Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt. Louis Spider Valentine. Harry Wills. Spencer Johnson. Oh. Now, Larry Estridge returned professional September 15, 1922, scoring a first-round knockout. Knocked out Kid Jackson in the very first round. Jimmy Brown in the first round. Petey Coleman would defeat him in 6. Yonkers, New York. March 1st, 1924, Larry lost to Angie Ratner. Now, they called him Augie Ratner, who was well known in the established divisions. He had 76 lynchings in the southern states. 50 plus lynchings was from police who arrested black members of protests. Over 500 men had busted in the police station, grabbed 2 black men who were in the prison cells and hung them. 1922 was some year for the boxing community. Larry Estridge, Harlem amateur star, will be overshadowed by bouts with the Jewish lightweight world champion, the ghetto wizard, Benny Leonard. He took on boxing's marvel, Jack Britton, for the world welterweight championship crown. The Orchid Man, world light heavyweight champion, George Compartier, was knocked out by Baron Siki, the first black world light heavyweight champion. Sam Langford, former 5-time world colored champion in the heavyweight division. Would knock out future first world black middleweight champion, Georgia Deacon Theodore Tiger Flowers. Pittsburgh Windmill, middleweight, Harry Greb defeats America's light heavyweight champion, Gene Tunney. Bloodied him up to the point of recognition. June 26, 1924, Larry Estridge became the colored world middleweight champion in his hometown of New York. 10 rounds against champion Panama Joe Gans, Cyril Quinton. He would begin the throwbouts against Sergeant Sammy Baker and Phil K.O. Kaplan, George Courtney, and Kid Carroll. 1925, at Portsmouth, Virginia, middleweight Allentown Joe Gans, his name was Joey Hicks, would become a middleweight sensation. After defeating two highly regarded black fighters, they were welterweights. Sandy Taylor and Joe Libby would be those opponents. The Gans would defeat Larry Estridge and Jack McVeigh. They lost to Roland Todd and Dave Shade, Jack Delaney, and Maxie Rosenblum. They had other black middleweights. Fighters such as Alexander Gibson, Kid Gibson. He stood 5 foot 11 inches, weighed 150 pounds to 160 pounds. He was managed by Odell Crump. October 4th, 1915, March 23rd, 1929. April 11th, 1919, drew 6 rounds with Joe Gans. He was better known as Nobby Joe Gans, and he was a colored lightweight champion. Fred Potter, they called him the Kid, defeated him in 10 rounds in 1920. Eugene Bullard, he was born October 9th, 1894, Columbus, Georgia. He died October 12th, 1961 in New York. Stood 5 foot 10 inches, weighed 156. And he was managed by Dixie Kid. Now the manager, Dixie Kid, stayed out of boarding house. It's owned by Shay Carter, who's a woman who housed other black fighters, such as Dudley Harrison, Jim Johnson, Sam Langford, Frank Craig, and Sam Milo. Dixie Kid would become the welterweight champion in a scandalous victory over Barbados Demon Joe Walcott, 1904. Dixie Kid was arrested July 4th, 1902, while standing on a corner, while being hit with clubs and nightsticks in the back of the head. He was standing on Broad Street, Philadelphia, basically minding his own business. Unfortunately, he was in the middle of a protest. And he and about 10 other black civilians would be thrown into the slammer. But he would make something of himself. He would become a colored middleweight champion. Joe Butler was born May 18th, 1866. He stood 6 foot and a half and weighed 156 to 175 pounds. He was managed by Tom O'Rourke. Joe Butler was a very polite gentleman outside the ring, but he was a beast inside the ring. And he fought a lot of his fights in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Began to box for money when he faced John Frederick in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Young Tommy Coleman was born June 5th, 1888 in Delaware. He died as a very young man Stood 5'9.5" weighed 141 to 152 pounds. He spent the majority of his career fighting 6-round and 8-round matches in Philadelphia. He was a slick, quick boxer. Coleman was also known in the boxing circles as a master boxer. Coleman faced and fought Lon Perel. Jack Dempsey sparred with him many times. He was trained in the athletic club in Philadelphia. And he was a main attraction. The favorite, Kid Turner, Joe Jackson, and Kid Grifo. Coleman fought from bell to bell with men such as Jimmy Clabby, Dixie Kid, Jack Blackburn, George Kid Ash, and Joe Grimm. Willie Langford, Hawk Barnes, Eddie Palmer, and Ruff Turner. Tommy Coleman had boxed 178 bouts over a 15-year span. Had matches with Jeff Clark, Joplin Ghost, Joe Stein, and Hawk Bones, Eddie Palmer, Dixie Kid, Willie Langford, and Joe Burrell. George H. Cole, he was known as the Trenton Tea Warmer, was born February 4th, 1874, Boardingtown, New Jersey. He was also known as Chestertown. He died February 19th, 1923, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He stood 5'7", weighed 145 to 150 pounds, and he was managed by Joe Butler. Had over 170 bouts, expanding over a 17-year period. George H. Cole was trained in Merchantville, and he met men such as Sam Langford, Jim Jeffries, Jack Johnson. George owned his own gym. He was once known as the chef. He could cook up a storm. He was the chief second and head trainer of Sam Langford, April 10th, 1910. He was preparing him for a bout with the Boilermaker, Jim Jeffries, and Reno, Nevada. He would also train Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost. The name, the Trenton Tea Warmer, came from manager Joe Butler. Charles Crutchfield, another black fighter that didn't get opportunities, was born April 23rd, 1892 in Washington District of Columbia. Died November 1966 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Stood 5'10", weighed 160 pounds. He was managed by Scott Bailey. Charles had two older siblings. His dad's name was William and his mother's name was Carrie. And they would run out of Allentown, PA. He would draw 10 rounds with Allentown Joe Gans, former world colored middleweight champion. February 22nd, 1922, Altoona, Pennsylvania. He had a ring with Battling Geehee, 5 rounds. He was stopped in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the month of October. James Tut Jackson, 10 rounds. We have a victory over him in Junction, Ohio, June 30th, 1924. Other names would be Jack Taylor. He would have a 3rd round exhibition with Jack Johnson, September 2nd, 1921, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, there was a man by the name of Julius Williams. His name was Jack McVeigh. He was born June 8th, 1905 in Athens, Georgia. He died October 29th, 1975 in Harlem, New York. He stood 5'9", weighed 147 to 162¼ pounds. He was managed by Maurice Kane. Jack McVeigh was one of 8 children in Athens, Georgia. He was born on Independence Day, 1905. Very young age. He and his family joined thousands of Southerners, and they would migrate to various northern parts of the states. Jack and his family, along with many other black families, relocate to the ghetto sections of Harlem, New York. 1910. It was then when Harlem was a safer place for black families who had young sons who walked the streets and became a major target in cities. There would be riots, buildings burning, young boys were beaten up, and older men were lynched. And all this would happen. July 4th, 1910, World Heavyweight Champion Jack Johnson would give the Boilermaker Jim Jeffries the business. 15 rounds. He would humiliate the former World Heavyweight Champion, stopping him in 15 rounds. This was such a blow to the establishment. All of major cities, Detroit, Chicago, New York, young boys would be beaten up. Fathers of little white boys would hold the little black boys while the little white boys would beat them up, hit them in the face, knee him to the groin, so on and so forth. During that time, it was dangerous for young boys to walk the streets. But what this did, this would cause many families to become very cautious where their sons would not be targeted. Many boys and young men now wanted to learn how to box themselves. This was now exception. Men such as Panama Joe Gans and Larry Estridge and Allentown Joe Gans. Jack McVeigh would soon join the Commonwealth Sporting Club. He would begin boxing, having an extravagant career. Being in Gym Daly, he would find a dark corner of the gym and he would shadow box. The world colored heavyweight champion, the Oxnard Cyclone, Sam McVeigh, would take a liking to Julius Williams, to the point where he would give him his last name, McVeigh. Julius Williams would now become the pride of Harlem, but his name would be changed to Jack McVeigh. Jack McVeigh would kill Kid Kaplan. Met him for the third time, March 27th, 1926. And this was some event. He would become the world colored middleweight champion when he would defeat Larry Estridge. But Larry Estridge no longer had the colored middleweight championship belt. Because in 1926, Theodore Tiger Flowers would become the first black middleweight champion. Larry Estridge's belt was stripped away from him. And Jack McVeigh would take on Larry Estridge when the belt would go back on the market. But Jack McVeigh would defeat Larry Estridge. en route to the colored middleweight championship division. Estridge will lose his title because of the first black middleweight champion, Theodore Tiger Flowers. And what was amazing about Flowers, he would be the first black middleweight champion. And he would get his first shot in New York's Madison Square Garden. Oh. After defending his title, August 19th, 1926, 15 rounds over former middleweight champion Harry Greb, Theodore Tiger Flowers would now lead that charge as a middleweight champion of the world. Harry Greb would give Theodore Tiger Flowers an opportunity he didn't draw the color line. Harry Greb would have 45 fights in 1919. He would take on Gene Tunney 5 times. He would face Faye Kaiser 9 times. He would take on Jeff Smith, the Bayonne Globetrotter, 7 times. Tiger Flowers would defeat him for the World Middleweight Championship belt. Scrapbook Boxing, let's meet up once again in a part 3 video right here on the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series.